Hello and welcome back to Forgotten Gems on Drive Home Reviews. I take it as a point of personal pride that I'm here for you all during these difficult times. It's rough. Certain places, they're having full lockdowns. They don't want anybody to leave their homes. And probably one of the biggest blows to a lot of folks is that at the very start of all this, professional sports were canceled. The NBA suspended their season, then the NHL suspended their season, the XFL suspended theirs, and virtually every tier of sports has followed suit. And that's rough for folks in general, but also at a time like this when you're kind of stuck inside, there's not much else to do. So people are having a rough time, but maybe we should look at this not as a negative, but as an opportunity. Let's be honest with each other, folks. Professional sports in this country have been on the downswing for quite some time. We want to hold them up in our minds as this perfect metaphor for life and America and the preservation of the human spirit. That's why sports are such great fodder for movies. Excuse me. We want to think of our sports stars as Rocky Balboas and the like, who are plucky underdogs who go out there and go the distance and have the eye of the tiger, and thus, as they are lifted up, so are we. But, folks, I think we need to come to a harsh understanding. The myth of what we want our sports to be versus the reality of what our sports actually are. Almost from the beginning of organized professional sports, they have been plagued with cheating scandals, sex scandals, steroids, spousal abuse, gang activity, drugs, more spousal abuse, more domestic violence, more steroids, cheating scandals, and the list just goes on and on and on and on and on. The relationship between us and professional sports is just like the relationship between a nerdy kid and the high school varsity football team. We will do their homework and let them fart in our faces because that way they know we love them. And maybe what we need to look at this shutdown of mass sports as is not a crisis, but maybe an opportunity, a time to hit the reboot button. Maybe it's time that we start fresh. Maybe we need something more, something new, something pure that hasn't been corrupted yet by money and power and advertising and greed. I think now, more than ever, we need BASEketball. So, BASEketball. Let's talk about this movie. BASEketball is my ace in the hole. It is the movie that I use to keep myself in check, because I find it, and maybe if you've watched some of these, you've heard me say it, as you're doing these reviews and you're talking about other people's work, it's very, very easy to become pompous and start railing on stuff, and this is so stupid and that's so stupid, and how could anybody like this, and blah, 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 blah. And when I get too much up my own ass, what I think it's always good to remind myself and the viewers of is, all that may be true, but I liked BASEketball, so what do I know? And yeah, BASEketball kind of carries that reputation. It is not looked upon very fondly by the mass majority of people. Matter of fact, last night, I was talking to a friend of mine who is a fandom. She's a fan of the show. Same person made me this, actually. And she was saying, well, what are you reviewing next? I said, BASEketball. And she said, so you don't like Will Ferrell movies, but you like BASEketball. And all I could say was, yeah, pretty much. And make no mistake, I understand where that criticism comes from. BASEketball is immature, it's vile, it has the gross out humor that I so often rail against. It is a snapshot of college humor circa late 1990s. It was a 1998 film, which is great for nostalgia, but really, college humor at any level is not exactly highbrow. This film is like so disrespected that even its stars, Matt Stone and Trey Parker of South Park fame, have criticized it on the show. They've done it several times, have made fun of how bad this movie is. And all that is absolutely true. I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that this is actually some hidden masterpiece if you dig deeper. No, it is all of those things. But you know what else it is? This movie is funny as fuck. This is one of those movies that I've seen hundreds of times, and every time I see it, I laugh my ass off. And there's not a lot of comedies I can say that for. You know, Airplane, the Naked Gun movies, ironically, all directed by David Zucker. So the master of parody takes on the sports world. I think, now it's hard to talk about comedy and review comedy because comedy is very subjective. And that's a stupid thing to say because all art is subjective. You know, one person's beautiful expression is another person's boring trip to the museum. But comedy especially is a hard nut to crack critically, because how do you criticize what's funny and what isn't? You know, all you can do is go from a subjective point of view. So it's hard to point out, like, this is why this movie is funny to me, because I can preach that to the end of days, which we're kind of in. And if you don't find that funny, it's not going to affect you. It's not going to work for you. But let's talk about the qualities of this movie. But before we get to that, actually, let's talk about what this movie is about, basically, for those who have never had the pleasure. So BASEketball is basically, you know, that big rant I just did leading up to this video? That's essentially what BASEketball is about. Sports have become too corrupt. They've become too commercial. You know, the spirit of athleticism is, you know, gone, and all it's about is money. And into this world comes these two guys, Joe Cooper and Doug Reamer, played by Trey Parker and Matt Stone, respectively. You know, two kind of washed up losers, you know, big stretch for them, I know, who just kind of accidentally invent a game called BASEketball, which is basketball but played under baseball rules. And this game becomes a big hit. It gets picked up, and they create a new sport that they can start fresh from. So that's the premise of the film, and I think one of the things to keep in mind, one of the reasons I like this movie a lot, is that this is not a parody of sports movies. I mean, it has the sports movies cliches in there. You know, the dying little kid who wants them to grant his wish of hitting 3 home runs, having to win the big game or else you lose the team. It uses the sports movie cliches as the framework to kind of have a bigger takedown, and that is talking about sports culture itself. Especially sports culture as it was in the 90s, which is not too far off from sports culture as it is now. And everything I kind of laid out for you right there in that kind of joking little rant is what they're talking about. Players, you know, it gives it all in like a the little narration at the beginning, players selling their services to the highest bidder. The prima donna athlete, when Doug Reamer becomes, rich and starts believing his own hype, becomes a very Dennis Rodman type. Clothing lines and whatnot being made in sweatshops. It talks about, teams no longer represent the cities they come from, but whoever can put together the highest paid roster. I love one of the first jokes in this I always love is when it talks about, the complete lack of loyalty that teams have to their cities anymore. Just a few years ago, the Rams and the Chargers both moved to LA because for some reason it was desperately important that we get teams in LA, even though no one in LA seemed to give a shit. But the people in Oakland and St. Louis really loved their teams. They're going to move the Raiders, that's the Oakland team, they're going to move the Raiders to fucking Las Vegas because somebody got it in their craw that Las Vegas had to have a fucking team. So screw all those fans that were with you all those years. Screw those people. These people are offering us more money, so we're going. And that's really where BASEketball's focus is at, is not so much sports movies, but sports culture. And that's about as deep as you can get with a film like this. I'm not trying to make it sound like this film has more going on. I think it has a little bit more going on than people give it credit for. It's not a deep think piece, folks. It's Trey Parker and Matt Stone joint. Here's what's funny about this that I've always wondered, is that this film is just marinated in Trey Parker and Matt Stone humor, in their sensibilities, and just them. This is like the prototype for South Park. And I mean that because this film, if I remember correctly, the history's kind of muddled here. I think this film was being made just before South Park hit. It had to be, because I remember South Park hit. Film's from 1998. I think the film hit then, and South Park started in 1997. So it was either just as South Park was becoming big or just before. All right. So this film was a big thing for these two guys. But according to everything I've read or everything I've seen, they didn't write it. They didn't direct it. David Zucker directed it. They had no, as far as I can tell, in terms of film credit, they had no real creative say in it. And yet the movie is just drenched in their comedy and their senses of humor. All the way down to the casting, which includes their buddy Dion Brancher, who I've just mispronounced his name. But Dion plays Squeak, which we used to call my friend Matt Emmel back in college. That's where he got his nickname. And Squeak is basically the prototype for Butters. The constant punching bag, the constant butt of the joke, the little guy who tries to have a mean side, tries to have a dark side, but just doesn't have one. He's just too nice of a guy. So, and he plays this role really well. He is really funny. I'm just going to call him Squeak from here on out, just it's easier. Squeak has been in a lot of their films. He was in Cannibal the Musical. He was in, he's a college buddy of theirs, so he was in Cannibal. He was in Orgasmo, both of which are possible films for this series. And of the three, he is definitely the best actor. I don't think he's Oscar worthy or anything like that, but he definitely seems to be kind of the grounding pin. Having him in their movies, especially this one and Orgasmo, he's like the lightning rod. He's grounded enough in the acting that he can help keep things realistic. And that's not to have not to say anything against Trey Parker and Matt Stone, because these guys are funny as fuck. All right? If all you know them of is South Park, then you have an idea of how funny, but they themselves are very, very funny, and especially together, they're a great comedy team. That probably goes because they are such good friends in real life. They are such longtime friends. And that's the other thing. The characters in this movie are basically them. You know, the friends from real life, from childhood, who create something that really takes off. One of them is the more creative mind behind it. The other has a hand in it, but isn't as, forward as the other. It's them. It's fucking them. How was this movie not written by them? I am so confused by that. How this movie was not written by them. But they are funny. And Trey Parker is incredibly funny with a lot of the stuff he does. The voices, he does a Cartman, he does a Mr. Garrison, he does the, I did believe once, but that was a long time ago. Really funny stuff. They have great timing. The film also carries on David Zucker's tradition of having actors in a film like this that you wouldn't expect to be in a film like this. That's one of the reasons why Airplane back in the day was such a success, was that it had actors that at the time no one thought of as comedic actors, like Lloyd Bridges and Leslie Nielsen. It's hard to not think of them as comic actors now, but at the time they were seen as straightforward actors. So this one has Ernest Borgnine in a small role as the guy who kind of begins BASEketball professionally, and he's hysterical. It's from him I get one of my, it's kind of a combination of him and Mystery Science Theater. I get one of my famous quotes. He's like, "You kids today with your loud music and your Dan Fogelberg and your hula hoops," So yeah, he is great. Robert Vaughn plays the villain, the evil owner, Baxter Denslow. And Robert Vaughn was always a phenomenal character actor, a very steady hand, always there. This was his 100th movie. I think they said they celebrated his 100th film on set. You know who else this movie is, for me, a real showcase for, is Yasmine Bleeth of Baywatch fame. Who, nobody coming off of Baywatch looked good. I mean, they looked good, but they didn't look good, acting-wise. But Yasmine Bleeth here really, I think, shows some great comedy chops. She's playing just the sweet, she plays the girl who's running the society, basically the Make-A-Wish Foundation. So she's sweet and kind and loving and all of this. She's the love interest. And she plays it so well. Always with that little wink to the camera, always with that sly little smile. It's not overdone, it's not overstated. She delivers her comic lines with great timing. And it's really sad to me that, she couldn't quite break the Baywatch mold. Also, parodies were kind of heading out around this time. Because I think she could have done more films like this. I think if people had seen her less of a sex symbol and more as a performer, but isn't that true of all pretty faces, sadly? But I think she really does a great job here. Also, of just amazingly funny in this movie. Again, lines that I crack up to all the time. Bob Costas and Al Michaels are the announcers in this. And oh my God, just like Bob Uecker in Major League, holy shit, they have some great lines. And again, these are not actors, these are sportscasters. And they are hitting it with comic timing, just so funny. At the very end where they're coming up and they're in the big game and Bob Costas is, "So this is it. It all comes down to this. if Coop makes this shot, he'll win the game and save the team. And just beat. Now Michael's like, or he misses. And now Michael's reaction is like, and that's another example of this film kind of lampooning sports culture, is that with these guys, they have to do all the things announcers have to do. They have to hype, the network shows that they're on. He's the star of same old shit, coming up on our networks. Who gives a rat's ass? It's Thursday lineup. You can tell if you've ever watched like football on Fox, you can just tell some of these guys are biting back the venom as they have to do the promos for these shit shows they gotta do. But they're incredibly funny in this. Great. One of my favorite bits in this is when they do it's a small little thing, but they do a bit about sports math, where it's two announcers, and I don't know who they are. They are actual sportscasters. And they're like, okay, so after the 7 months of postseason play, the playoff picture is starting to take shape. So if the Bears beat Denver, they will advance to Jacksonville, and that will reduce their magic number to 3. That is, of course, the Eastern Southwest Division does this, and it's just long, complicated. If you've ever watched football during the playoffs, you know exactly what they're talking about. Well, this guy beats this guy, and this guy beats this guy. I love when they have the dying kid in the hospital, little Joey, and he wants to spend a day with the Beers, so they make him like mow their lawn, and they take him to get like an Oriental massage, and they take him to the bar, and he gets drunk. Again, immature, yes, but funny. Another big joke about this film was the different teams they came up with, the stereotypical teams. They had the Miami Dealers, the Milwaukee Beers, the San Francisco Fairies, the Texas Defenders. What was the other one? The New Jersey Informants. I'm still mad to this day I haven't been able to find a New Jersey Informants jersey. I would really love one of those. So, again, this film is not perfect, and it is very much a product of its time. I'll come back to that. Another thing I love very much about this movie. I'll take care of that in the end. And one of the downfalls to that, aside from the burgeoning of gross out humor, which was nothing new, but this film came out around the same time as There's Something About Mary, with the cum in the hair and all that. So it was kind of starting out the whole ball rolling, and it's pretty tame by today's standards, but still there's some stuff there I'm like, oh, I don't need to see that. And this shouldn't come as a big shock, but like the movies of Kevin Smith, this movie has a little bit of, not a little bit, it has some tasteless homophobia jokes. I'm not defending that. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying it was that time, it was that place, and it's obviously, I credit it to the same thing that I credit it with the Kevin Smith films, as it's how people who are very uncomfortable with the concept dealt with it. Not making it okay, just saying, that's kind of why it was so prevalent back then. The gay culture was just kind of starting to emerge, starting to come out, if you'll pardon the expression. But people were uncomfortable with it, and they were trying to find ways to deal with that discomfort. So the film's not perfect. Clearly it's not perfect, but still really enjoyable. Two other things I really like about this movie, or just one other thing to talk about in terms of its takedown of sports culture, and one other thing I really laugh at with this movie. The one other thing I want to talk about with the takedown of sports culture is, of course, one of the things this film was known for at the time was that the cheerleaders for each team were these girls in negligees doing stripper dances. One of the first lines that Bob Costas and Al Michaels have is, hard to believe that 5 years ago, this game was just played in suburb driveways. Yes, and hard to believe 5 years ago, those girls were only in grade school. And Bob Costas is like, But again, that's another thing, you know, the over-sexualization of women and cheerleaders in professional sports. Again, not saying that it's going for these deeper things, but it's what I read into it. One other thing I gotta say, then this, you know, if I'm talking about moments in this movie that I always laugh at, no matter how many times I've seen them. They do a bit where Coop disappears to go take care of the child labor things in Calcutta, and they do a bit on unsolved mysteries about him with Robert motherfucking Stack, the master. And if you didn't grow up in the 80s and you didn't watch him on Unsolved Mysteries, you don't know. You don't know what that voice did to a generation. And just that delivery. So Robert Stack, of course, a veteran of these things, because he was in Airplane. He was one of those people I was talking about that nobody thought of as a comic actor, and yet did these lines with just such a straight face, and it made it so funny. You know, where he's doing the Unsolved Mysteries about Coop, and he's, you know, according to Mrs. Blanchard, a neighbor down the street who asked not to be identified, he left his apartment. According to Mrs. Johnson, a nosy bitch who lives up the street, you know, and is straight-faced. You know, his detectives have put together several possibilities, and they go to Matt Stone. He's like, I don't know where he is. For all I care, it could be hanging by his neck in his fucking closet. And Robert's like, scenario number 1, he's hanging by his neck in his fucking closet. Just, again, I'm not doing it justice. And then when they find out where he is, and, you know, they're trying to get his girlfriend back, Robert Stack said, update, we found where he is. He went to Calcutta and did all these great things. I'm sure all of us are thankful that a person like Joe Cooper exists. If I were a woman, I'd sure like to be his girlfriend. Holding hands, gazing into each other's eyes, holding each other in the spoon position, our hearts beating as one. It's just this, it's Robert Stackian delivery, and you can't beat it. And again, I laugh every fucking time. This movie is not for everybody. Clearly, no movie is. But it's a throwback to my college days. It is a time that has a lot of links to happiness in my life, you know, and I'm sorry, it's fucking funny. It's just fucking funny. So if you have never had the pleasure, if you're a South Park fan who's never watched the kind of extended filmography of Trey Parker and Matt Stone, if you're a fan of sports movies, if you're a fan of sports, I think there's something in here for everybody. Again, not everyone's gonna like it. Fine, if it's not your cup of tea, that's fine and dandy. But I love this movie. I think it's hysterical. And especially these days when you need to laugh, it's a film I'm glad I revisited. So, that's it for BASEketball. But we're not done. We got plenty more to come here on Forgotten Gems and Drive Home Reviews. We're all in this together, folks, and we're going to get through it together. So, until next time, drive safe, and I'll see you at the movies.